Okay, well, we should start promptly. So welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for attending. This is our first experimental curiosity seminar for natural sciences for this year. So we'll have one in the spring as well. So is our inaugural speaker, and we're very pleased to welcome back an alumnus of our physics program, Dr. Elliott Schmitt. Dr. Schmitt started his post-secondary education here at LTU. So he was one of you a few years ago. He earned his Bachelor of Science in Physics and a Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering in 2007. So he was sitting in one of your seats at one point here, not too long ago. After that, he moved on to earn his master's degree in mechanical engineering from the University of Washington in 2009. He also earned a Master of Science in Applied Mathematics from the University of Washington in 2011. Loves education, hence back at Lawrence Tech to visit us today. And in 2015, he earned his PhD, again at the University of Washington, in bioresource science and engineering. So very well-credentialed and interdisciplinary speaker to welcome today. Thank you for coming. Since he earned his PhD in 2015, he's worked in the Boston area at a variety of pharmaceutical and biotechnology companies, first at Vertex Pharmaceuticals, then Biogen, and now since 2018 as a principal engineer at Moderna. And today he's going to share some of his knowledge and insights on process analytical technology for biopharma manufacturing. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Schmitt to LTU.
Thank you. Thank you, Shannon. That's a really nice, warm introduction. I appreciate it. And thank you all for coming. Even if you got the extra credit, I'm glad you're here. Good to see everyone. So I'll probably be walking around a little bit. Hopefully, we can kind of keep this discussion based. I'll go through the slides. But if you have a question, we can try to stop and answer it. Otherwise, we may just wait till the end. But feel free to raise your hand if you have a question. So let's get going through here. So we're going to talk about curiosity. I really like this theme. We'll talk a little bit more about curiosity, but specifically how it applies to process analytical technology in the field of biopharmaceuticals. So a little bit of the content. So we'll talk a little introduction, although there was a nice introduction already. Talk about the importance of curiosity in the workplace, PAT as a framework for biopharmaceuticals, what are some of the components of PAT, and then just kind of close off with some examples, kind of hopefully tie it all together, but mostly high level here. So again, this is already a nice introduction. This is kind of going over what's already been said. But yeah, when I was here at Lawrence Tech, one of the great things was I got to take courses, obviously, in the arts and sciences building and the engineering building throughout the different colleges and campus. And I think that really opened up my mind to being willing to explore other areas of science and engineering and really trying to get a grasp on what does it mean to be a scientist and an engineer and how do you kind of tie these together. And so I focused a lot in the areas of actually renewable energy at that time. That was a big interest of mine and still is to this day. And so it was kind of interesting going from that skill set, then going into grad school where I continued to work on sustainability and renewable energy, but then started learning all the different skills that were being applied to the research I was doing, becoming more focused on those skill sets and how they could be applied to different problems, which is kind of how I ended up in this area called process analytical technology, which I'll discuss a bit more about. But in grad school, my thesis was on continuous fermentation and using advanced process control. Essentially, I was turning trees into beer and trying to find the most efficient way to do that and be able to monitor it with different spectroscopy techniques. So it was a pretty fun research project. And then, as was mentioned, in my career, I've been focusing in the biopharmaceutical space, starting off in what we call small molecule chemical-based pharmaceuticals, specifically at Vertex, focusing on rare diseases, cystic fibrosis. And Vertex focuses specifically on that right now. And that was big for me because I've had multiple family members on my dad's side who have passed away from cystic fibrosis. It's a really sad disease, genetic disease. So it was great to see people actually, the life expectancy for people not on any treatment is between the age of 21 to 25. Now they're living normal, healthy lives based on these treatments. And then moving on to Biogen, where I worked on a couple of different things for Alzheimer's, which is aducanumab, which is a mAb-based protein. And then Spinraza, which is for spinal muscular atrophy, which is another kind of sad genetic disease. So again, some life-changing, altering treatments, and it was really nice to be a part of these. And then now I'm working at Moderna, which obviously has been in the news in the last couple of years. When I joined in 2018, I was employee like 700. And a very small biotech startup company. No one knew about us. We were only 10 years old. And then obviously the RNA technology worked very well for COVID vaccine. So we've grown tremendously since then. And so I worked on the Spikevax, the whole company did. But a large part of my work has been working with DARPA, which is the defense agency, and this is all in the public domain, that we had before COVID, we got a grant to work with DARPA to basically come up with technology that if an outbreak occurred of some virus, oddly enough, and you could take this technology and manufacture a vaccine within 48 hours and deploy it anywhere in the world. And so we were already kind of thinking about this before COVID happened and how you would do this. This was just more of the defense agency's version of it, where you would drop off some manufacturing thing with a helicopter in the middle of nowhere. So it was a really interesting premise of an idea, but what it allowed for us to do is develop a lot of new technology to help support what we're working on today. So, which now today I work on individualized cancer treatments. So, again, I really like this topic of curiosity, experimental curiosity, and I actually got curious as to what does it actually mean to be curious. And so I had to look it up, because I think everyone has like an innate understanding of what curiosity means. What does it mean to be curious? But what does it actually mean? Like, where does it come from? And I have tried looking it up and doing a little bit of research, and actually found out there is no real definition of curiosity. No one really knows what it means to be curious. But we all have this kind of internal understanding of what it means and feel to be curious. But there's some theories, and the theories say that, maybe perhaps it's an innate drive, like hunger, something we just feel and need. Or it could come from the fact that maybe you have a worldview, something you understand and know, but then you're challenged by someone else's view or some external view, and that makes you want to understand, why is there a difference there? And you try to make that connection. Or it's just the fact that you just have a knowledge gap in some area and you want to learn more, and that's where it comes from. So there's these various theories of what is the nature of curiosity, but kind of keep us all on the same page. I'm just using this definition it's a focus or exploratory inquisitiveness that motivates us to connect what we don't know to what we do know. And so what are some common attributes of curious people? And I think if you all thought about like who you think is a curious person, and you started describing how they behaved, I think a lot of us would come up with these same ideas. I mean, clearly there's someone that seeks knowledge, and they seek knowledge kind of as its own reward. There's no like actual, I'm trying to do this because of this. It's actually because you want to know. And they're constantly asking questions, and I agree 100%. That's one of the biggest features, is someone that always asks questions and seeks answers. But also that they're very open-minded and willing to explore new ideas, right? So they're not just set, once they learn something, they're not set in that idea. They're willing to accept other points of view and perspectives. There's someone that embraces uncertainty and comfortable with ambiguity, which is really important, especially when in a research area, we're constantly finding not answers, but more questions, right? And so you have to be comfortable with the idea that we may never know the answer to some of these questions we're asking. You have to be comfortable with the search for the answer, not necessarily the finding of the answer. And finally, they're observant and pay attention to details. So I think this is a pretty good list. It's obviously not an all-inclusive, but I think this is a pretty good characteristics of what a curious person acts like. And here's some examples. I think most of us should know who these people are, but Mary Curie on the top, a two-time Nobel Prize winner in chemistry and physics, studied radioactivity, and some great quotes from her to be less curious about people and more curious about ideas. Obviously, Albert Einstein, we all hopefully are familiar with him. And he says here, "I have no special talent, I'm only passionately curious," which is a really nice quote. And then my favorite, no comparison to myself, but definitely someone I aspired to be like, was Isaac Newton. Just for the simple fact that, if you imagine living in the 17th century, all the stuff we do today, math, science, physics, none of this really existed, and he had to develop it on his own. He had to develop calculus to figure out laws of gravity. Like, could you imagine? I mean, I love that idea, and that he went outside of his area of expertise to find that and work on it, build that information. So he says, we build too many walls, not enough bridges. You have to make the rules, not follow them. And that he's seen further than others, and it's by standing on the shoulders of giants. And I think that's another important premise, is that we need to recognize that everything we learn comes from someone else before us, and that's what we're doing. We're establishing another layer, another foundation for the future. And so that's what a curious person does, is they're seeking that knowledge to build that foundation. So I went a little deeper into, is it actually important to be curious at the workplace? And I actually found this really nice report from CoAS. And they surveyed 1,973 managers across the globe, 6 countries, 5 different industries. And they asked these managers various questions about what does it mean to be curious to you and your employees. And the perceived managers valued said that 72% said they find it to be a very valuable trait to be a curious person. Now, most of them said it's part of the corporate values. So all companies have a values, what they expect their employees to behave like. And curiosity for most of them is part of those values. 59% said it drives real business impact. And then most of them says it's correlated with top performers. Right? So you can already see this is really valued by managers, like someone comes in and that they have a curious nature. And some of the benefits they see from people that are curious is it creates greater efficiency and productivity, more creative thinking, stronger collaboration and teamwork amongst people, greater job satisfaction for the employee, and that they're more flexible in uncertainty. Again, that uncertainty, ambiguity. And what's really interesting is that most all managers view curiosity as a performance indicator. In other words, when they're assessing you as an employee, and they're trying to decide how do we train or develop them, where do we do that, they use curiosity as a foundation for them. They use your performance review at the end of the year to say, hey, how did they perform? Were they curious? They use that to evaluate whether you're going to get a promotion or not, to say, are they actively curious? And they even use it in hiring and as part of the values and criteria for hiring. And I can actually attest to that. That's actually a really important aspect when I'm interviewing people. Does anyone know, like, if you go to a job interview, what is the last thing any interviewer asks? Does anyone know? Go ahead. Absolutely, that's it. They always ask, do you have any questions for us? And it is by far one of the most important things I look for, and I can attest to my colleagues and peers as well, that we look for. If someone comes into an interview and we ask them, do you have any questions for us? And they say, no, we're good. I mean, clearly that person has no interest in being there or has no desire to learn more about what you're doing. So why would I want to hire that person? So I look for people that ask really good questions at the end. And usually that takes, time for you to go and kind of research and understand something about the company. So you put a little effort in, or just, about what the company is going to do for you. Both of those are important, how to engage with the interviewer. So being curious in an interview is really important. Okay, so some of the roles where these managers from the interview or the survey where they found curiosity is important to. So whenever you're doing any type of data analysis, any type of innovation work, when you're acting as a team leader, if you're doing anything that's customer focused or trying to solve complex problems or working cross-functionally. These are all areas, not an all-inclusive list, but areas where behaving with a curious mind is important. And then how can you foster curiosity? In other words, curiosity isn't something you're just born with, you either have or you don't. It's something you can develop as a skill, and it's something your environment can also foster. So you should look for opportunities to ask more questions about context, approach, and broadening horizons. You should look for opportunities to have encouraging exploration and experimentation in your classrooms is a really good opportunity for that in the labs. Promoting a growth mindset and resilience in the faces of challenges. Providing opportunities for discovery and hands-on learning. So again, what you're doing here, these are great opportunities for that. Creating supportive, inclusive environment for sharing ideas and experiences. So again, you're in the perfect environment for that right now. So this is the perfect stage and area, environment for you to start developing your curiosity skills. So I'd encourage you to do that. Okay, finally, just a little summary of what we just talked about. Again, curiosity, desire to know or learn. People with curious habits tend to ask a lot of questions. They seek new experiences. You can foster curiosity through exploration and having a growth mindset. And the importance of it is it drives innovation and sparks creativity, no doubt. All right, now going into the PAT as a framework. How am I doing on time? I think I got, okay, great. Okay, so going into quality by design, what does that mean, and what does it mean to pharmaceuticals? So without trying to give a very lengthy explanation, I'll try to do my best to kind of summarize this. So obviously, the most important thing about making any type of pharmaceutical treatment or drug is safety, patient safety. That's number one. You can't do anything if you're not making something that's effective and that's going to be helpful to it and not harmful to a patient. And so there's a lot of regulatory requirements around how we do that and what's required to go into designing how we would manufacture a biopharmaceutical. And what we call it is quality by design. And so that means you're designing the quality into the product. You're not testing for it later, right? So you already know when you're manufacturing it that you have a good quality product because you have good understanding of what the drug does, how it's made, and what are the quality attributes associated with it. So this is all part of wanting to have a better understanding of your process, having knowledge and understanding of what you're trying to make, and that all comes from a purpose or sense of curiosity, right? So we have deliberate design efforts for product conception through commercialization. Again, we have full understanding of how product attributes and processes relate to the product performance, and those are, don't worry so much about the ICH, but those are the guidelines that we have to follow. These are international guidelines because every country is required to do this. So no matter where you're manufacturing a drug, you have to follow these guidelines. But the goal of PAT is to help enable that understanding and control the manufacturing process, which is a key enabler to the QBD process. So getting a little bit more detailed, what does actually PAT mean? So what we're really talking about is any inline, meaning if you have a process, say some material, chemicals flowing through a pipe, you're actively taking a measurement of that material as it flows through. Or if you have some type of reactor, you're actually monitoring that reactor with some type of measurement. So that's inline. You could do it online where you're not touching the material, but you're measuring maybe through a vessel. You could do it outline where you're actually pulling a sample and that's going through some type of analytical instrumentation or measurement. Or you could be completely offline where you're taking that sample to a lab, right? And the point of that is, again, to further process understanding, trust, enable control through the execution of fast, frequent, and often automated measurement acquisitions. And so again, where's this done? So this could be done in the development space, in a research and development, or it could be done in the manufacturing facility, right? Hopefully, that's where we would like to implement this, in streams and reactors and unit processes. And so again, we're looking for real time as the key, right? So these aren't measurements that, once you made the product, we're taking and looking at it later on, days or weeks later. This is happening as the process is occurring. We're taking these measurements in for active control and understanding. And again, that just leads to quality control and some of these other release scenarios. So one of the things I like about this area, why I chose to continue and work in this area, is that it allows me to work in many different fields, right? So that's kind of my bread and butter, is I'm a jack of all trades, but not an expert in any, just dangerous enough to know a little bit of what to do. But you have to know a little bit about process, chemical, bioengineering. You have to know about physics, analytical chemistry, data science, modeling, mathematics, statistics. Statistics is actually one of the most critical, I'll just throw that out there, is one of the most critical things you can know. I think it's one of the things we least cover in undergraduate and even graduate education, but being good in statistics and design of experiment is massively important, massively important. And then control engineering. And so, again, these are just some examples of how we could apply PAT. We can use it for real-time process monitoring. This helps us reduce the amount of offline samples that need to be collected and tested, improves our process understanding, enables faster support. We can use it for process control, and that can be done through active control or batch monitoring. So we'll get a little bit more of what this means, but it means like if you're taking all the data and looking all together and as a whole picture totality of how your batch or your process looks, you can do a lot of math and interesting statistical analysis to say, yeah, that's a good batch versus all the other batches you made, or it's very similar or different from. So you can quickly identify when something goes wrong. And then finally, you can get into predictive modeling, quantification, and then finally, some type of advanced process control. So what are some components of PAT? So a lot of it is spectroscopy based. So these are the more advanced PAT tools we use, but we also use simple pH, temperature, pressure sensors as well are very common. But I like to work a lot with like the spectroscopy based equipment. And so these are basically optical based analytical instrumentation, right? So you probably have them in your chemical labs here. And I'm sure I see a head shaking. So yeah, you probably worked with these. Why I like it is because it's so fast, and it's amazing what light can do and what you can do with the analysis of light. So UV spectroscopy, you're measuring ultraviolet lights for molecules. NAR spectroscopy, you're using near-infrared light. FTIR, using absorption, transmission, and reflection of infrared light. And then Raman spectroscopy, I work a lot with, using Raman scattering effects, which we'll kind of cover. So some of these tools, so I'm not going to go into any details, very high level. If you have questions about vibrational spectroscopy, I point you to your chemical and analytical and physics teachers to that. But basically, it's non-destructive identification methods available from vibrational energy in compounds, right? So chemical bonds, they're not rigid. They bend and move and shake in different forms, and when you shoot light at them, they vibrate in different ways and send light back, and you can look at that spectra, which essentially becomes a unique fingerprint for every chemical. So every chemical, when you have a bond, molecules in a reaction occurring, if you're using these different types of spectroscopy techniques, you can get a spectra back that is unique to that chemical or molecule, which is really, really fascinating in terms of what you can do with that. Now you can do identification, quantification, understanding. So that's what we use. We use these techniques to monitor these processes. And here's an example of what some of these, the spectra look like, whether you're using FTIR, NAR, or Raman, and then some of the examples of the difference between them from an industrial standpoint when we're actually utilizing these. So some of the strengths of all of them is that they're fast, right? We're talking measurement in seconds, right? You're getting multiple measurements in minutes. They're all non-destructive, so you're not destroying your sample, so you can do it inline. Some of the weaknesses is that some are more or less sensitive or more or less expensive. So NAR is kind of weak absorbance, but it's much more inexpensive. But it's very absorbing of water. So if you have a very aqueous-based solution, you probably want to use something like Raman, which is less sensitive to water, but is more expensive. So there's trade-offs, and you have to consider that when you're making your selection on what tool to use. So once you have, you select what technology you're going to utilize, you're measuring your process in real time, you're then getting this spectra back, which is this data here on the top. Let me see if that, no, you're not, that pointer's not going up there. But on the top picture that says PAT method development. So you're getting all this data back. You're getting like something like a row of 3,300 variables for a few samples. So it becomes a big data problem. Right, so how do I manage this data? How do I find the features of this data that are important to the reaction? And how do I take that feature and turn it into something quantifiable or understandable or relatable that will give me information that I need to run my system? Right, so now it becomes a mathematical data science problem. So we went from an analytical chemistry problem to now a mathematical data science problem. And the answer a lot of times for this is to use what we call chemometrics, multivariate analysis, or machine learning. These are tools that have been around for decades, right? But now we're calling it machine learning, AI. It all means the same thing. And so what we can do with this is exploratory analysis using principal component analysis, cluster analysis. We can find important sample or variable relationships, define classes and species. Or we can go into classification, discrimination analysis. We can say, yes, this sample does contain this material. No, it does not. Or again, we can go into regression, prediction, quantification analysis, where we use things like partial least squares, multiple linear regression, and predict important attributes in new samples. So there's a whole process that goes into this that's necessary not only for our understanding, but also, again, for the regulatory understanding. Because now at this point, we are not just taking a measurement, we're developing an analytical tool that is going to be used in the production of a chemical or a drug or a treatment, right? So we have to very clearly define how and why we selected certain variables, what they mean, and how we can say for certainty that that's what we're measuring every time. So we start with data collection. And again, this goes back to we start with a design of experiment because we typically only have a limited amount of material. So we have to come up with a very optimal design of experiment to test and understand what we're actually monitoring. We then have to look at the data, do variable selection, figure out some pre-treatment for the data, do model optimization, and finally figure out what diagnostics we're going to use to tell us that our model is correct. So again, now we're going from analytical chemistry, statistics, data science, to now analytical method development. And so here's some examples of some PAT. So the first is a pretty straightforward example that we can work with, and this is using UV technology to monitor what we call tangential flow filtration process. And so this is very common TFF process for any type of purification. You typically start with some material, you have some impurities in it. You're going to flow it through the membrane, and you're going to get out retentate, which is the material that's going to flow back in, and the permeate, which stuff you want to come out. And we can monitor the stuff that comes out, which is hopefully the product that's purified, using UV. And for this, we're going to be monitoring RNA. But we looked at using a different technology. This is slightly different than normal UV. This is a technology called slope spectroscopy. One of the issues with using UV is typically when you have higher concentrations, you tend to what's called saturate the detector. So it means, in other words, you're getting too much signal, and your detector can't handle it. So you need to dilute the material and lower the concentration for the detector to be able to use it. So this technology uses something slightly different. So what it does is that by changing the path length and the absorbance, you get this slope. And then rather than measuring the absorbance directly, we're measuring this change in the absorbance as the path length changes, which gives us the slope. So we're measuring the slope. So sorry, I ran through that really quickly, but you can just trust that it's me doing the same thing, but it's allowing us to do this without having to worry about saturation, a higher concentration, background effects, baseline changes, things like that. So it's a really important technology that we use. And so the first thing we did when we were looking at this technology is, okay, I have to implement this into a process. Now, when I have a process in a manufacturing site, I don't just have one batch reactor or one process. I have multiple of these things, right? So we're making a lot of different products. So how do we know that this UV sensor is going to work the same as this UV sensor is going to work the same as this UV sensor, right? Because there's variability of every new technology that comes. So we first have to assess what's the impact from flow cell to flow cell for the UV sensor. And what we saw was, yes, all the sensors function the same. And so what we have here are different concentrations, concentration 1, 2, and 3, how the flow cells, the red, blue, and green, how do they behave? Do they look the same? And that's what we're trying to see is, or do they change? Is there variability up and down between them, which we don't see, so which is really nice. The next is we look at, okay, what are the impacts of different process conditions? So temperature, flow rates, how does that change the measurement, right? So you have to kind of start thinking, okay, I select this technology, I know how I'm going to measure the concentration, but now I have to think about this as being implemented in a process. Some guy that doesn't know or girl who doesn't know how to use this is going to be playing with this thing every day. They're going to be running the process over and over. How is it going to change over time? How does it change as the conditions change? And really have to think outside the box holistically about what could impact your measurement. And so flow rate and temperature are one of those things. So we see within there that there isn't much change between that, which is good, what we want to see. And then finally, we want to see how does it compare to the standard technology, which is the UV plate reader. So, and what you want is everything to fall in that Y to X curve, the 1-to-1 line, and which is what we see with our square values of 0.99. So, and then once we've done all this, plus a bunch of other work, right, then we can finally say, yes, this technology is ready for use, and we can finally implement it to monitor the reaction. So this is what that TFF reaction now looks like, or the process looks like, right? So we can see at the start of the TFF, you start concentrating the material, you change out the buffer, doing a start dye filtration, which means your concentration is going to stay the same, but you're changing out the background buffer, which does not impact the measurement as it should. And then at the end, you're going to upgrade and concentrate your product, which is exactly what we expect to see. Now before, when we did this process, you would just see what happens at the end, right? So we would have no idea what happened before during this process. We know something's happening. We know what it should look like, but if something went wrong, we wouldn't know that until we took that last measurement a week later, right? So this is what it does. It tells us more information about our process real time and saves us, weeks of holding that product up because we know immediately it's good to go, right? And we have more information and understanding of what our process looks like. Okay, so that's example one. The next example, a little bit more complicated. So to make RNA, typically the first process to synthesize is called in vitro transcription. And if you ever brewed beer or did any type of fermentation, it's very similar to most biochemical reactions. It's not that complicated, actually, which is pretty surprising. Nature is amazing what it does. So what you do, you start with some DNA that's on the left, right? Some DNA of a sequence you want to make. You then take some nucleotide phosphates, triphosphates, and then you mix them in with some buffers and some enzymes, some RNA polymerase, right? And so what's amazing is now the RNA polymerase, which is this enzyme, attaches itself to the DNA. It starts reading each base pair of the DNA, the A, C, G, U, or GT, right? And it pulls in the nucleotides that are floating around it. It looks for the A's, the C's, the G's, and the U's, and it pulls it in, and it starts making the RNA. So the enzyme does all the work. Whatever you give that DNA, that it's going to make the RNA equivalent to that, which is amazing. And it does this in 3 hours, right? Which is a really important process. So this is called transcription. But what we don't know is what does it look like if you're trying to monitor this process? Like, how can you tell if your reaction's going well? How do you know if your RNA is being made? Things can go wrong, temperature could be off, various things could happen. So we actually found that Raman spectroscopy can be very good at monitoring nucleic acids. So it can monitor your NTPs that are coming in the process, and also can monitor the formation of your RNA at various concentrations. And so this is from a paper that was published a long time ago, but you can see RNA actually can distinguish not only that you are making RNA, but the various base pairs that you're making, whether it's an A or C or G or U, it can tell you the concentration of those. It can tell you the phosphate backbone, what that looks like, whether it's a phosphodiester bond or phosphodiester bond. So it can give us a lot of information with a very quick measurement. And so part of that, again, when we're assessing this technology, we've decided, okay, we're going to start looking at this. This seems to work based on literature review, but how would we actually integrate it, right? How would we do this? And so one of the challenges is the integration, because every manufacturing site, every manufacturing process, depending on the product, could have a different type of reactor system. It could be what we call a single use, which is essentially a plastic reactor, or it could be a multi-use mechanical steel vessel, right? And so these are different ways you would have to integrate, which makes it very challenging because now every product has a different way to integrate. Every operator has to be trained in that. And it becomes a lot of work to develop for each new product. So if you can come up with a universal way to do it that would work for every product, every process, that's what you want to do. And so there's this technology we called the shot viewport that we worked with that was really cool, because you essentially just put a window onto any vessel, and then what you see in the top right picture, that's our Raman probe. And now we can insert that Raman probe into every window that's on the vessel now, whether it's a single use or a multi-use. So now it becomes this universal technology that we can use for any process. So once we do that, now we start testing, okay, what does it actually look like? And I think, sorry, apologies, but I have some of the numbers covered up for other presentations. But essentially, here's what a GTP, ATP, CTP, and UTP, the chemical molecular components that go into making your RNA, this is what they look like individually using Raman. And what's actually nice is, let's see if I got it here pointed out. It's kind of hard to see, but each of these, the largest peak is what we call, it's a triphosphate bond. So we can actually not only tell the individual ATP, CTP, GTP, UTP concentrations, but we can look at the total NTP concentration of the triphosphate bonds. So again, a lot of information with one measurement. So if we mix all these chemical components together, right, now we have this going into the reaction. That's what it looks like on the left if you took a Raman spectra and pre-processed it. So now we can see the individual components. We can apply, again, our data science techniques, PCA, And we can distinguish, yes, our 4 components are in there. So we don't have to look at the spectra every time. We just have our math or our scripts run this, and it can tell us, yeah, they're all in there, and identify it very quickly. We can go even further. And then once we have the identified each individually, we can actually predict the concentrations of each of these using PLS, linear regression, different machine learning techniques. So again, now we're applying analytical science and data science and chemical engineering. And then finally, if we have our reaction, this is the IVT reaction, we can actually see the various components. So again, on the left side, we can see this is actually the buffer material in there. That's magnesium, sodium acetate, tris, various buffer components. And in the middle, we can see our total RNA concentration going up. We can see our total NTP concentration going down. And in the bigger box, that's where our individual NTP components would be if we needed to understand whether A, C, G, or U were off. So we can track a lot of information in this and use this to monitor. And you can imagine where you can go with that. Now that you can monitor it, you can control it, right? So we can have active models predicting and saying, okay, if we're at this concentration now, where will we be in an hour, right? And we can have all set up our processes ahead of time. We can diagnose any faults and detect any faults early, right? So it gives us a lot of comfort, confidence, understanding of our process with very quick information. Okay. I think that's it for me. So I think that's the summary. So just kind of going through. So again, curiosity is the desire to know or learn. I think that's something we all can agree on. People tend to ask a lot of questions who are curious and are open-minded to new ideas. The people who are managers see curiosity as very important. It's a valuable trait for high performers and is an important performance metric. And then Pat kind of very briefly, high level, went through a lot of what Pat is, but it's a framework for process understanding and innovation for biopharma. It requires bridging a lot of expertise and curiosity for execution. And we use a lot of different spectroscopy, multivariate, data science, model predictive control, things like that for execution. And then, we talked about some examples really briefly, but we can talk about, if anyone has any questions, some more details of that, but very high level for UV, for TFF, and Raman for IVT reaction monitoring. Okay, I think that's all I got, so thanks everyone.
I think we have some time for questions. I can take
Yeah.
the mic around. So
Okay,
I can answer
cool.
the question for you. Oh, wonderful. Dr. Nelson, can I bring this up for you so we have this on your recording? Sorry.
Whoops, sorry. Thank you. Nice talk. And go UW. It's a great school. I think we got 2 PhDs in here. Isn't Paul's here too? Yes. And yeah, so there's 3 of us got our PhDs there. You have a lot of students here, and you've gone through this. What can you tell them is the number one thing they should be doing now to get where they are now to somewhere where it's like you're very passionate about what you're doing?
Yeah, is this on? Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's a great question. And I was trying to come up with that when I was building this, and I tried to come up with that in that little section on curiosity to really think about that. And we were even talking about during breakfast this morning, what does it take, for the student to make that shift from when you're just in, okay, give me the information so I can pass the test, so I can do my homework, to really, really trying to use that as a foundation for learning and building for what you can do with all this information, right? And I don't have a good answer as to why or what you got to do, but I think for me personally, what hit what was really talking to the faculty, to be honest, and my peers as well, right? And really taking the time to understand, asking questions afterwards, and just kind of learning from them and seeing their interests in what they're doing. But also, I think, and I still use this quote today when I talk to co-ops or interns that I work with, a faculty member here told me actually, and I still say it, if you always want a job, find something really hard to work on, right? And it's totally true. It's very basic, but it's totally true. If you want to work on something easy, good luck keeping that job. That's how quick technology advances. Who knows what will be there. But if you're working on something hard, and you're dedicated to going at it, what's going to happen is you're not going to just work on that thing, but you're going to learn a lot of skills along the way, right? You're going to have to dive into areas you're not comfortable with, right? And that you're very kind of like, okay, I'm not that. Do I really need to learn that? Yes, go learn that, because you never know when that's going to be helpful in the future. And you only get that, I think, that experience by diving into hard problems, right? So if you're always looking for the easy way out, again, looking for that, okay, I just need this information to pass my test, and I get it. I had to do the same thing. It's very hard to get that mindset. But if you start diving into a problem because, hey, I really want to understand why and need to learn the skills to answer that, I think that's where that kind of grows from. So I don't know if that answers the question, but that's kind of my random thoughts on it.
Excellent feedback. Great ideas. Great, Dr. Mookville, coming right over. Students are allowed to ask questions too. Everyone in the audience.
You get extra credit.
Thank you. I'm a biochemist, so my question would be, I don't know if it's related or something, but you talked about safety and all the things that you take into account before you finalize a product as a pharmaceutical drug or anything. So my question has two parts. One is, how long does it usually take for that process to complete?
Yeah.
And number two, one of the concerns that people had during the COVID vaccination was the safety, because it didn't take too long and we didn't have that much time to actually come up with the vaccine. And anti-vaxxers especially had this point that this is not safe because it has not been it has not went through all those processes that actually make sure that the drug is safe. So would you like to comment on that?
Sure. Let me just first comment by saying my views, anything I express, are my own personally, and I do not represent Moderna by being here or anything Moderna believes. But no, I totally understand. Because normally a vaccine, I mean, the lifetime or the development of a vaccine is typically 10 to 12 years normally, right? And many development products, and it can change because it also depends on. Is there a treatment out there already for that? Like, is there a need? Like, is there a group, a population of people who are underrepresented, underserved, and not getting any type of treatment and are dying and need something right away? And that can, make things a lot faster. They can accelerate the approval process. And that's FDA does all the approvals of that, or other regulatory agencies. But yeah, it typically takes a long time. Obviously, COVID was a very specific situation. I don't think anyone should expect any vaccine in the future to move that quickly. But you never know. I mean, these technologies also, part of it is how fast RNA technology can be implemented, right? That's one of the reasons it was able to accelerate so quickly. What I showed, I mean, we were talking about MABs earlier this morning. I mean, these are like, to make a MAB product, you're talking about months to do one batch, right? An RNA batch can be done in days, right? So it's very fast, and that's in a manufacturing. In a development space, it can be done even quicker. Like I was saying, I work on technology that can do it in less than 48 hours, right? From start to finish. So there's a lot of factors that came into play. Obviously, the pandemic, the need, and then the speed of the technology that made that so fast to happen, and is driving RNA today as a technology. But yeah, typically, because you need to run clinical trials, you need discovery, you need safety data, they typically take a long time to do that. And they should, right? They should. We need to always look at our data and make sure patient safety is number one.
Other questions? Students? Oh, Dr. Michelli, yeah.
Sorry, I can't help myself. I always have questions. You showed a slide right before your first example of a PAT that was all like a bunch of boxes of the different disciplines and the different things that contribute to the PAT process. This. Yeah. I'm wondering, how many people are involved in these different things? Like, how is their expertise distributed? Yeah. And then if one person is like passionate and has some ideas, like how does it get into like the final method?
Yeah. Thanks for that question. So how many people are involved? This here. No, I have typically I've worked at 3 different companies on PhD teams. They're typically pretty small in the development space. You're talking about a team of maybe 3 to 10 people at most. And then manufacturing might have their own version of that team to take on, transfer the technology to them, and that might be a similar team where they're just kind of administering and maintaining the technology. But typically we're looking for people that are experts in certain areas, maybe like the math side, the statistics side, or the analytical chemistry side, the spectroscopy, or engineering. And then we can teach the rest, in certain areas if we need to. It'd be very hard to find someone that was an expert in all these areas, so we have to have some level of training involved. But that's kind of part of the fun of it. I think, there's different roles, obviously, in what I work in is called technical development. In technical development, it's typically the two biggest areas, functional areas, are what's called analytical development and process development. And you can guess what each of those do. Like the analytical development, they come up with the tests. I'm talking about the lab tests, right? So when you make some material, some samples, they're the ones that develop the test, they run that sample, they tell you the results. The process development, they're developing the process, they're coming up with how they're gonna manufacture this product in the future. So it's more of an engineering type thing versus analytical. We sit in the middle, right? So we're doing both. So we get to work with the process development people and how to integrate the technology, and then we get to work with the analytical development and how to come up with the testing. So you kind of need that, have a broad area of expertise to come up with and develop this type of skill. But again, I like to think that these are things that can be trained and learned if you have, again, not to be kind of cheesy, but a curious mindset. If you're open and willing to new ideas, it's very easy to train someone in this area, right? And then oftentimes you'll see someone that wants to be an expert in one of the specific areas, right? They really like Raman spectroscopy or FTIR, or they really like the machine learning side of it.
Any other questions from the audience? Had some great questions, great insights so far. Well, I think Dr. Schmitt will be available after the talk for a few minutes to talk informally with people. I want to formally thank him so much for coming here to tell us about the importance of curiosity, his incredible career path, and his highly interdisciplinary work, right? We have probably I see students shaking their head. We have engineers here, scientists, many students from all kinds of different degrees, and amazing how they could all contribute, and understand parts of what Dr. Schmitt is doing. So thank you all for coming, and thank you, Dr. Schmitt.
Hey, thank you.
Oh, and there is free pizza available for everyone, so I encourage you to stay and network and chat with each other and Dr. Schmitt after the seminar right outside in the lobby, right outside S100, everyone. So enjoy, and thank you all for attending.